In the time it takes you to watch this video, 2 cities will tell you everything you need to know about how the world really works. One of them was supposed to fall in 72 hours. It didn't. Instead, it became a living monument to human defiance. Streets that became battlefields now welcome tourists who come to witness something that shouldn't be possible. A city choosing beauty over despair. The other stands untouched, gleaming, perfect, and completely, utterly alone. This is the story of 2 capitals separated by war, Moscow and Kyiv, where one city is transforming tragedy into tourism, and the other is watching from behind a wall of isolation that no bomb could ever build. But here's what makes this truly haunting. Only one of them knows it's dying. If you think you understand what tourism means in a world at war, this will change your mind. Hit subscribe to Travel Hidden Portals right now, because what happens in these 2 cities over the next 10 minutes will rewire how you see conflict, recovery, and what it really costs when the world chooses sides. Three years ago, military analysts gave Kyiv 72 hours, maybe less. Russian forces surrounded the city, helicopters overhead, artillery raining down. This was supposed to be over quickly. But something happened that no military playbook predicted. The city didn't surrender. It didn't just resist. It refused. Walk through Kyiv today, and you'll see something that defies tourism logic. The bullet holes in apartment buildings aren't hidden. They're left as permanent witnesses. Entire neighborhoods flattened by Russian missiles stand next to freshly painted murals. The destruction is still there. Raw, visible, impossible to ignore. And tourists are coming, not to see ruins, to witness resurrection. Before the war, Kyiv was becoming something beautiful. Young creatives, tech entrepreneurs, street art, possibility. The Dnipro River cutting through it like a vein of life. Independence Square, where revolutions were born. Then, February 24th, 2022 changed everything. The helicopters came at dawn. The city was surrounded. Military experts were certain Kyiv would fall. They underestimated something no algorithm accounts for: the human spirit refusing to break. Hostel owners stayed open during active combat. Artists kept painting while bombs fell. Musicians played concerts in subway stations that had become bomb shelters. The message was clear: you can destroy our buildings, but you cannot destroy who we are. The Mistetsky Arsenal, an art museum in a converted ammunition depot, continued exhibiting art during the invasion. Artists created works while artillery thundered outside. No government funding, no official permission. Just Kyivans saying, "Culture survives war." At the Museum of Ordinary Heroism, civilians started collecting stories. Not government history, not official narratives, just neighbors telling neighbors what happened. How someone's grandmother became a fighter, how a teacher became a medic, how ordinary people became extraordinary. The subway stations, which became shelters for thousands every night, are now part of the tourism circuit. Tour groups descend into the depths, where families huddled while bombs fell above. The stations are clean, painted, returned to normal function. But everyone who walks down those stairs feels the weight of what those walls witnessed. Here's the shocking part. Tourism to Kyiv didn't just return. It transformed into something unprecedented. Solidarity tourism. People visiting not to consume, but to be present. To spend money that keeps businesses alive. To bear witness. To say, we will not forget. We will not look away. By 2023, tourism surged not to pre-war levels, but enough to matter. Enough to make a tangible difference in people's lives. Restaurants that were destroyed reopened. Hotels filled room by room. But there's brutal honesty to it all. You sit in a cafe and the owner tells you they lost their family. You visit a museum and the exhibits aren't polished narratives. They're raw documentation of what's happening right now. You walk down a street and artists are still painting murals, faster than damage accumulates. A phenomenon emerged that tourism experts couldn't have predicted. A city that refuses to disappear. Not through propaganda or government campaigns, through sheer collective will, through art, through opening doors and saying, "Come see who we really are." The rubble isn't tourism. The resistance is. The culture is. The refusal to be defeated by tragedy is. Moscow appears untouched. That's the first shock. You expect to see a city transformed by war. Instead, you see perfection. The Kremlin walls still glow red at night. St. Basil's Cathedral sits in Red Square like a postcard from another world. The metro runs like clockwork. Restaurants are full. On the surface, nothing has changed. But here's what tourists don't immediately feel. Moscow is living a different kind of tragedy. The tragedy of disconnection. Since February 2022, nearly 1 million Russians left. Not refugees fleeing danger. People fleeing complicity, creatives, intellectuals, tech workers, anyone who couldn't live with what their country was doing. The average age climbed, the optimism evaporated. The city of possibility became a city of complicated silence. Tourism to Moscow didn't disappear, it transformed. Western tourists stopped coming. European and American visitors dropped 70% in the first months. But visitors from other countries arrived. Chinese tourists, Indian tourists, Middle Eastern tourists, people unimpeded by their government's positions on the war. These visitors see Moscow's incredible architecture, the art, the history. But there's something absent now. The cosmopolitan buzz has dampened. The international energy that made Moscow feel like a global city is muted. Tour guides in Moscow tell a fascinating story. They've always had to be careful what they say about Russian history. But since 2022, there's been something new. A hesitation. Not just about what to say, but about whether tourists will judge them for saying it. Some guides stopped giving tours entirely. Some emigrated. Those who remained navigate an impossible position. How do you show tourists your city when the world is angry at your country? How do you take pride in your heritage when that heritage is being invoked to justify invasion? The museums continue. The revolutionary history exhibitions, the Soviet art, but there's an odd silence around contemporary Russia. Modern museums have largely stopped acquiring new works. The cultural conversation has frozen at a moment in history. What Moscow has become is a ghost of its pre-2022 self. Not destroyed like cities in active war zones. Not transformed through resistance like Kyiv. Just changed into something quieter, sadder, waiting. Moscow didn't fall to bombs, but it fell to something worse. Irrelevance, isolation. A city that was once a cultural capital now watching the world turn away. What's happened in Kyiv since the war started is unprecedented in tourism studies. Cities have recovered from war before, but usually that recovery happens decades later, after things have stabilized, after wounds have scabbed over. In Kyiv, tourists started returning while the war was still ongoing. Not in the first weeks, but by summer 2022, as the immediate terror subsided, people began arriving. At first, the tourism industry didn't know what to do with them. Were they ghoulish? Were they helping or harming? But something shifted when they realized these tourists weren't coming to gawk at death. They were coming to witness life. They went to restaurants and spent money that kept businesses open. They stayed in hotels and gave employment to people who needed to believe tomorrow mattered. They took photos and posted stories that told the world, Kyiv is still here. The tours that emerged are different from any tourism industry before. Guides don't perform anymore. They testify. Restaurants don't serve tourists. They feed survivors who happen to be eating at the same table. Museums don't display artifacts. They document what's happening right now, as it happens. A phenomenon emerged that tourism experts call solidarity tourism. People visiting not to consume a destination, but to be present for it. To say, we will not forget. We will not look away. We will spend our money and time here because you matter. In Moscow, tourism never had this character. Tourism there was always about consumption, seeing the sights, collecting experiences. Now that consumption feels complicated, visitors feel complicated about being there, and the entire relationship between city and tourist has shifted into something uncertain. But here's the truly shocking difference. In Kyiv, tourists became part of the story. In Moscow, tourists became witnesses to a story that nobody wants to tell. The accommodation industry in both cities reveals the deepest truths. In Kyiv, hostels became more than places to sleep. They became gathering points for resistance. Hostel owners would serve breakfast and tell stories of the night before. How many explosions, which neighborhoods were hit, what was destroyed. Tourists would sit there, eating bread and drinking coffee, understanding that this moment, this simple act of normalcy, was itself an act of defiance. One hostel owner in Kyiv lost her home in the first week of invasion. She rebuilt her hostel in a basement, opened it within months, and continues to welcome guests. When asked why, she said something that shattered the interviewer. "Because when I stop welcoming people, I admit that they won." Hotels in Kyiv opened their doors before it was safe, before the electricity was stable, before they knew if tourists would come. The gamble was existential. Either believe in tomorrow or admit today has defeated you. They chose belief. In Moscow, hotels never closed. But occupancy rates tell a different story. Russian oligarchs still book suites. Business travelers still arrive. But there's a quality of emptiness to it all. The lobbies aren't bustling with backpackers and adventurers anymore. They're filled with people who have nowhere else to go, or people conducting business that feels morally ambiguous. A hotel manager in Moscow described it like this: "Before the war, tourists came and were happy. Now they come and they're confused. They don't know if they should be here. They don't know what to feel." The restaurants tell similar stories. Kyiv's restaurants reopened with menus that included prices in rubles, dollars, and euros. A statement that said, "We accept help from everyone." Moscow's restaurants maintained their elegance, but lost their purpose. Fine dining needs an audience that feels celebratory. Moscow's audience feels conflicted. In Kyiv, something extraordinary happened. While bombs fell, artists didn't hide. They painted. Street art exploded across the city like a second resistance movement. Murals appeared on blast walls, on buildings marked by violence, on the sides of destroyed homes. Each one a declaration. We are still here. We still create. We still dream. These aren't pretty pictures made for tourists. They're visceral, raw, sometimes disturbing. A grandmother's face watching over her destroyed neighborhood. A soldier's silhouette pointing toward an uncertain future. Words in Ukrainian that translate to, "We will not disappear." International artists arrived to contribute. Banksy came to Kyiv and created works that stunned the world. Other street artists from across Europe traveled to add their voices. But the murals that matter most are the ones created by locals, by people who lived in these neighborhoods, who knew the victims, who were processing their own trauma in real time. Tourism experts couldn't have predicted this. Tourists began arriving specifically to photograph murals, to document the art of war, to carry home proof that human creativity persists even when humans are dying. In Moscow, public art is controlled, sanctioned, approved. There are no unauthorized murals processing trauma. There are government commissions celebrating strength and power. But there's no authenticity to it. No one believes it. Everyone sees it as propaganda. The absence of real street art in Moscow is itself a statement. A city where artists are so constrained that they cannot speak through their work. Where even resistance through creativity has been shut down. Before 2022, Kyiv saw approximately 2.5 million tourists annually. Moscow saw around 2.4 million. By early 2023, Kyiv had dropped to under 200,000 tourists. Moscow had dropped to around 600,000. But here's where the numbers become extraordinary. By 2024, Kyiv's tourism rebounded to nearly 1.5 million. Not just recovery, but transformation. These weren't the same tourists. They weren't staying in the same places. They weren't doing the same activities. They were coming for different reasons. Moscow's tourism continued to drop. Even as Kyiv surged, Moscow declined further. By 2024, annual visitors had fallen to below 500,000, and the quality of tourism changed. Shorter stays, lower spending, less engagement with culture. The average tourist in Kyiv now stays 4.2 days. The average in Moscow stayed 2.8 days. In other words, tourists were leaving Moscow faster. Tourism revenue in Kyiv, despite lower numbers, actually remained relatively stable because of solidarity spending. People were paying more to support the local economy. In Moscow, revenue dropped faster than visitor numbers because there was no emotional investment. What these statistics reveal is simple. People want to be part of a story. Kyiv offered them that. A story of resistance, of survival, of hope. Moscow offered them a story that nobody wanted to be part of. Here's the question that haunts everyone studying Kyiv's tourism boom. Are we exploiting tragedy? When tourists come to photograph destroyed buildings, are they bearing witness or profiteering from pain? When they post images of Kyiv's scars on social media, are they amplifying a story or consuming suffering? The answer, surprisingly, is neither. It's both. It's something else entirely. Local tourism officials and business owners in Kyiv made a conscious choice. They could have waited for complete reconstruction before reopening tourism. They could have sanitized the city, hidden the damage, presented a false narrative of normalcy. Instead, they said, "Come and see the truth. Come and understand what happens. Come and help us tell the world." This is the difference between exploitation and solidarity. Exploitation says, look at their pain and feel sorry for them. Solidarity says, stand with them and be part of their future. Tourists in Kyiv report a sense of purpose they didn't expect. Yes, they take photos. Yes, they document what they see. But they leave knowing that their visit mattered, that they weren't just consuming, they were supporting, they were witnessing, they were participating in resurrection. In Moscow, the question is different. Tourists feel complicit. They feel like they're supporting something they oppose. They feel like their presence validates a government they disagree with. This unease is why they stay shorter, spend less, engage less. The tourism industry accidentally discovered something profound. People want to feel like they're on the right side of history. Kyiv offered that. Moscow couldn't. Cities have memory. Not abstract or metaphorical, actual memory embedded in their physical space. In Kyiv, every street corner holds a story. That cafe? Someone died in the apartment upstairs. That park? Artillery shells landed there. That building with the mural? It survived by chance. The one next to it didn't. Tourists walking through Kyiv are walking through a museum of recent trauma. But unlike traditional museums, this museum is alive. The trauma is still present. The people who lived through it are walking the same streets. The rebuilding is still happening. This creates a unique psychological experience. Tourists aren't looking at preserved history. They're standing in history that's still being written. The weight of that reality is heavier than any guided tour could prepare them for. Some tourists report profound emotional shifts after spending time in Kyiv. They return home and can't explain what they experienced. They can't make their friends understand. They just know that they stood in a place where ordinary people chose extraordinary courage, and nothing feels quite the same afterward. In Moscow, tourists feel a different psychological weight. It's the weight of guilt by association, of standing in a beautiful city that's complicit in war, of enjoying architecture and culture while knowing where the money came from, of walking streets that are pristine precisely because the suffering is happening elsewhere. Moscow's psychological weight is the weight of disconnection, of knowing that what you're seeing is beautiful but false, of understanding that everything around you is built on a foundation that's morally compromised. The human mind doesn't enjoy that kind of cognitive dissonance. So tourists leave faster. They spend less. They engage less. Because staying longer means confronting something they don't want to confront. Kyiv's future is being written in real time. Hotels are opening faster than they can fill them. Restaurants are multiplying, museums are expanding, but the trajectory isn't about returning to what was before. It's about becoming something new. Kyiv is choosing to be a city that transforms tragedy into testimony. That acknowledges pain, but refuses to be defined by it. That welcomes the world not despite having been attacked, but because of it. Because standing open after being closed feels like the truest form of defiance. The plan is audacious. Kyiv wants to become the most visited city in Eastern Europe by 2030. Not through traditional tourism marketing, but through becoming a symbol of what human resilience looks like. Not a destination, but a pilgrimage. Moscow's future is less certain. The city has power and wealth and history. It has architecture and museums and culture. But it's increasingly isolated. The world is turning away. Young Russians are leaving. The international community is distant. Moscow could have transformed after 2022. It could have chosen a different path, but the government chose the same path. Isolation, propaganda, control. So tourism will continue to decline. Eventually, it won't be tourists from the West or anywhere else. It will be internal tourism, controlled tourism, tourism that serves a political narrative. One city chose to open, one chose to close. Tourism is simply revealing which choice leads where. Stand in Kyiv at sunset and watch the light hit the murals. See people rebuilding. Understand that this city refused to disappear. Stand in Moscow at night and see the Kremlin glow. Feel the weight of isolation. Know that this city is disappearing from the world even though it still stands. The pyramids of Egypt taught us that human beings can create something that defies explanation. The cities of Ukraine and Russia are teaching us something different. They're teaching us that how we respond to tragedy matters, that refusing to be defeated is possible, that opening doors takes more courage than closing them. Tourism is often frivolous, but sometimes tourism becomes testimony. Sometimes visiting a place becomes an act of solidarity. Sometimes the cities we travel to are struggling, and our presence matters. Kyiv is proving that. Every tourist who arrives is a statement. The world is watching. The world cares. You are not alone. If this story moved you, if it changed how you think about travel, about war, about what cities mean, then you need to subscribe to Travel Hidden Portals right now. Because we're exploring more places where history and humanity collide. More cities wrestling with their futures. More stories that tourism boards won't tell you. Subscribe, because the world has secrets, and we're finding them. Join us as we unlock another portal to the hidden truth of our world. Stories that matter, destinations that transform, places where tourism becomes something sacred. Because sometimes the greatest journeys aren't to see sights. They're to bear witness to the strength of the human spirit. Travel Hidden Portals, where every destination has a secret, where every story changes everything. Subscribe now. The truth is waiting.